So good afternoon, everyone. I am very excited to participate to this conference today. I think that my intervention will integrate Dr. Al-Hamwi's intervention, but I will focus in particular on Ǧawdat Saʿīd's hermeneutics of Qur'ān 256. Actually, among the abundant Quranic verses calling to tolerance and peaceful coexistence between people of different faiths, Qur'ān 256, la ikrāha fi al-dīn, that is, there is no compulsion in religion, is undoubtedly one of the most cited. Since the classical time, it has been at the center of a debate that involved the exegetes, traditionists and jurists around its abrogation or not, by virtue of the so-called Quranic science of the abrogating and abrogated, al-nāsiḥ wa-l-mansūḥ, according to which, in case of apparently contradictory contents, some verses have the power to abrogate others, by virtue of Qur'ān 106. We do not abrogate a verse, ayah, that means also sign, or cause it to be forgotten, except that we bring forth one better than it or similar to it. In practice, this science has been used to limit at various degrees the normativity of those Quranic verses promoting peace and tolerance in favor of those calling for military jihad against the unbelievers. This debate is reflected in the various positions observable in contemporary Islam regarding freedom of worship and, by extension, freedom of thought, ranging from its total denial to conditional acceptance up to the affirmation of tolerance as an essential principle in Islam. Amidst the intellectuals who have become spokespersons of this latest trend, a major, though still underestimated role is played by the Sunni Syrian preacher and theologian Ǧawdat Saʿīd. By means of a methodological and epistemological approach in Quranic hermeneutics he developed from a substantially anthropocentric and social perspective, Ǧawdat Saʿīd can be considered one of the most prominent contemporary contributors to the efforts for a religious, social and intellectual renewal of the religious discourse in Islam through the adoption of non-violence in Islamic action. In his works, great attention is devoted to discuss la ikrāha fi al-dīn, which is described as the jihad of the prophets, who, and I quote, broke the link between thought and violence and freed the battle of ideas from the battle of bodies. The aim of this intervention is to highlight the doctrinal and social implications of this interpretation of Qur'ān 256, whose practical implementation is intended by Saʿīd as the main criteria of a true adhesion to Islam and its finalities, namely the establishment of a global human community engaged in promoting peace, justice, and harmonious coexistence on earth. Actually, it is primarily on earth that men are requested to realize God's eschatological project. As Saʿīd points out, and I quote, the Qur'an speaks about the existence of two beyonds, a beyond in this world and a beyond after this world. But people recognize in the Qur'an only the beyond which is after this world. This demonstrates, according to him, that God established two kinds of punishment and reward, one in this life and another in the hereafter, and men should give the priority to the first. What is at stake, Saʿīd argues, is a genuine understanding of the message brought by the Qur'an, which clearly indicates that man must expect, first of all, earthly consequences from his individual and social behavior. Hence, it is his duty, the duty of man, to engage in an effort to rise himself and to progress towards his supreme ethical goal, as forecasted by God's reply to the angels, shocked by the decision of placing man as his vicegerent on earth in Qur'an 2:30. And when your Lord said to the angels, indeed, I am putting on earth a vicegerent, they said, will you place upon it one who causes corruption therein and sheds blood, while we celebrate your praise and sanctify you? God said, I know things you do not. What is emphasized in this verse is that the dilemma of mankind, according to the Qur'an, is not related to its fidelity to the doctrine or to a correct practice of worship. Rather, it is an eminently ethical dilemma, which impacts directly and uniquely on society. As Saʿīd puts it, the angels spoke about corruption and bloodshed, and not about lack of faith in God or in the last day, or about the direction of prayer to east instead of west. This indicates that the problem of corruption and bloodshed is at the very origin of all problems. Saʿīd says, al-mushkilat. In this same social perspective, this same social perspective that Saʿīd applies to the Quranic story of the two sons of Adam, which he interprets as an archetypal story demonstrating that violence is the primordial problem of mankind. Okay, we already saw this passage. So let's say that for Saʿīd, this pivotal passage proves clearly that violence is deep-rooted in human existence, but at the same time, it shows equally distinctly which is the method to follow to face violence, that is, radical refusal of reacting to violence with violence, to the point of abstaining from self-defense. This is what Saʿīd calls the method of Adam's first son, which he identifies as the method of the prophets. Nuh, Hud, Musa, Shu'aib, and Isa are among the prophets mentioned by Saʿīd as having patiently and peacefully announced the message that God had entrusted to them, despite the hostility of the peoples to whom they were sent. The principle on which this method is based is that of non-compulsion. The primacy accorded by the Prophet Muhammad in Mecca to pacific predication, da'wah, is in perfect continuity with this method. For about 13 years, he abstained from using force and violence towards his opponents, urging his first companions to do the same. It was only in Medina, where the Prophet was appointed through free consensus as the leader of the first nucleus of Islamic society, that jihad in the military sense was allowed, but not on any terms. Instead, it was subjected to very specific conditions which were intended to drastically restrict its field of implementation. The first of these conditions is the existence of what Saʿīd describes as a distinctive Islamic society, mujtama' Islami mutamayyiz, as the one which appeared in Medina. The other conditions are expressed in Qur'an 22:39-40, al-Hajj. Those who have been attacked are permitted to fight because they have been wronged. Those who have been driven unjustly from their homes only for saying, "Our Lord is God." Okay. Hence, Saʿīd argues, jihad is the use of force after having obtained the power through consensus of the people, with the aim of impeding compulsion in religion, if it is not possible to impede it without fighting. Moreover, as Saʿīd observes, permission, that is udhina in the above-mentioned verse, precedes obligation. And this means that man has the faculty to choose if to engage in jihad or to adopt other means, leaving de facto the door open to further developments of an even more restricting interpretation of the doctrine. At a later stage of Saʿīd's life, this approach will take shape in the concept of the death of war, and the conditioned jihad will leave room to the adoption of radical nonviolence. However, he argues, Muslims have soon abandoned the method of the prophets in favor of the idea that jihad has been established to spread Islam, to fight against other faiths, and to gain power. Saʿīd is deeply convinced that Muslims must first rediscover the correct meaning of jihad and the specific legal conditions of its implementation, in the absence of which jihad cannot be considered lawful. In addition, they must re-establish the indissoluble link between jihad and non-compulsion, that is, la ikrāha fi al-dīn. Therefore, the only way to spread Islam is the method of the prophets, that is, patient announcement. This is the way to change and reform society, and the primary path to establish a distinctive Islamic society based on consensus, justice, and equality among all citizens. Hence, la ikrāha fi d-dīn is the way to liberate human beings from mutual slavery, for in this society no one will be above the others. That's why, for Saʿīd, la ikrāha fi d-dīn means also la ilaha illallah. There is no God but God, thus becoming synonymous with tawhid, monotheism, to which Saʿīd gives a visibly social meaning. Tawhid represents the achievement of supreme justice, where no one enjoys prerogatives over others. Consequently, in Islam, it is not unbelief, kufr, that provokes combat, but injustice. Previous one, okay. I quote, "Unbelief, kufr, remains and has the right to remain after being defeated. Therefore, the goal of fighting will not be that of eliminating unbelief, but of eliminating injustice. And the greatest injustice is to oppress an opinion and to practice coercion in religion." Likewise, even the truth should not be imposed by force, for truth is strong in itself by virtue of its correctness. Nonetheless, Muslims have lost faith that their ideas can convince others, and for this reason they clung to violence and the use of force. Instead, for Saʿīd, I quote, "It will be history to sift truth from falsehood, as stated by Qur'ān 13:17, Ar-Ra'd. The truth disappears, but what is of benefit to people stays behind." A pivotal verse described by Saʿīd as the law of abrogation, qanūn al-nāsiḥ. What Muslims need is to observe reality, which our author considers a supreme authority and a source of knowledge, where God, according to Qur'ān 41:53, Fussilat, has deposited his signs, ayat. "We shall show them our signs, ayat, on the far horizons and in themselves, until it becomes clear to them that this Qur'an is the truth." Reality and history, Saʿīd argues, demonstrate that those who impede freedom of conscience are doomed to fail sooner or later, regardless of their material force or their war potential. Ǧawdat Saʿīd manifests here his marked eschatological optimism, which is a constitutive feature of his peculiar teleology. In order to understand la ikrāha fi d-dīn correctly, it is essential to resort to the Quranic concept of taghut, which is mentioned in the second part of Qur'ān 256. Okay. So, let's see Saʿīd's hermeneutics of this second part of the verse. So the first sentence, "There is no compulsion in religion," is explained by the the first sentence, yes, is explained by the second sentence, "The guide is well distinguished from error." Since compulsion is error and non-compulsion is the guide. The point is then explained in the third sentence. "And whoever disbelieves the taghut and believes in God has grasped the firm handle." And who disbelieves the taghut means compulsion, since taghut is the one who compels the people. And believes in God indicates those who reject coercion and protect people, believers and unbelievers, if they accept to live according to justice and peace among the people and do not resort to killing and expulsion on the grounds of religion and opinions. The taghut is then the one who forces people to follow his opinion or belief and kills them and drives them out if they have a religion, opinion, or thought different from his own. Hence, according to this interpretation, Islam gives man the right to embrace any belief, or not to believe at all. A believing society can therefore only be democratic, because faith in God is incompatible with compulsion. It is a society where no one should be forced to hide his faith, where all should have the right to express their opinion, as long as they do not impose it on others by force, as Saʿīd stresses. Therefore, la ikrāha fi d-dīn represents for Saʿīd much more than a general ethical principle, but a veritable modus vivendi, opposed to the approach which Muslims, according to him, have adopted for centuries, and that is now more than ever an obstacle to their progress, to the reform of their societies, and to their inner and personal change. What has been said so far can help us draw some brief conclusions about the doctrinal implications of Saʿīd's hermeneutics of Qur'an 256. Okay. An aspect that emerges from Saʿīd's method and that deserves to be mentioned insofar as he makes extensive use of it in his works is what we could describe as a process of de-dogmatization of certain concepts of Quranic derivation in favor of their interpretation in social terms. This is the case, as we saw, of the concept of tawhid, to which Saʿīd applies the meaning of supreme justice, or that of taghut, interpreted as the archetype of the tyrant. Actually, what we observe is a decisive paradigm shift from a theocentric to an anthropocentric perspective towards revelation. Furthermore, what we observe is the overcoming of the juridical categories of Dar al-Islam, Dar al-Harb, and even Dar al-Ahd, which are not rooted in the Qur'an, but are nonetheless widely attested in classical and contemporary literature, and which establish de facto a fundamental asymmetry in the ontological status of Muslims and non-Muslims. A similar strategy is applied to the concept of nasikh, the doctrine of abrogation, which is intended as a metaphor for the law of change, expressed in the Qur'an by those verses evoking the idea of continuous creation. And it is therefore submitted to the higher normative authority of history. In this sense, Qur'an 2:106 is directed by Qur'an 13:17, al-Ra'd, namely the verse of abrogation, according to Saʿīd, to which he attributes, hence, an epistemological as well as a teleological relevance. Epistemological, since it indicates that reality and history are the sources of knowledge. Teleological, since it shows the very orientation of the unfolding of history. Far from having been abrogated, ikrāha fi al-dīn, as the method of the prophets, is the principle that must guide men towards the creation of a new world, a different world where dialogue and inner reform prevail, as Saʿīd says. Instead, it is compulsion and violence that have been abrogated once and forever by history, which showed their unusefulness in reforming societies and solving disputes. The doctrinal instrument of abrogation acquires here a new and innovative application in complete rupture with the one widely attested in the legal and exegetical tradition. As Saʿīd often points out, it is not about denying or cancelling the doctrine of jihad, nor that of abrogation, but to recognize the epistemic preeminence that the Qur'an attributes to reality and history and their teleological orientation. The principle of non-compulsion, therefore, becomes the very foundation of a global community united in the promotion of peace and justice and the rejection of violent means in human interactions. As Saʿīd puts it, those who accept the idea of no compulsion in religion form a single ummah. So, thank you very much. Bibliography.